Adrian.
And I'm Senia.
Welcome back to The Truth About Marriage. And today our topic is about sex. That's everyone's favorite topic.
Sex?
Yeah, sex.
Everyone's favorite conversation?
Absolutely,
oh
absolutely.
My, let's see what we're going to talk about today.
Well, you know, when we're talking about sex, I know for you and I anyway, is that, you know, for over 20 years, it has been a great experience.
You know why? Because I believe because we aim to please each other, and that's a good thing.
And it's important too. I mean, you know, when you're talking about sex in a marriage, I don't care how old you get, I don't care how many years you have, you definitely have to keep that peace within the marriage, because that's a part of what God has given to us. Number one is a benefit, but also too is that I really believe from a spiritual and from a physical that that's what really brings us together as one, as we're getting one in mind, one in body, one in soul, and in spirit. It's a part of that sexual fellowship that we have to have.
Honey, you know, we always talk about that. That's one of the things that as far as a marriage is concerned, we both need each other in that area.
Absolutely.
As far as sex is concerned, we owe each other that. And the scripture talks about in 1 Corinthians 7 and 1 through 6, it talks about do benevolence.
Yeah, do benevolence, meaning that, hey, that you don't have power over your body, I don't have power over my body, and God is saying there that, you know what, even when you're going into an area of fasting and prayer, that you need to get consent from your husband or your wife even before you do that. So, you know, none of that, you know, well, I'm going to be off on a fast, you know, for 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 months, and now the spouse, the husband or wife is going without that sexual fellowship.
So what you're telling me, we're not to neglect each other?
Absolutely.
You know, we're to give each other over to one another.
Well, what that says to me is that also in 1 Corinthians is that God really respects that in a union, because he doesn't want us to get separated from one another through that sexual fellowship, because that's a part of what keeps us together and bounds us together, you know. So therefore we got to have that, because that's a piece of spiritual unity.
And that's called pouring into one another and getting the best out of each other. And, you know, and also it's a stress relief. I must say that it is a stress relief. We enjoy each other.
Well, you have what I need.
See, and you have what I need.
Absolutely. So with our couples today, they're going to be learning about that, what the importance is of that. They're going to also learn that, you know what, there should not necessarily be boundaries there.
So let's see what our topic is talking about today: sex in the marriage. Ladies, we're talking about sex today, and one of the things that is very important is that you be open with your husband, that you have an open communication. Sex is so important, and I'm just going to inform you that that's when the spirits meet. You know, that's when the two of you become one flesh. So take in consideration not to neglect each other. Take in consideration to aim to please one another so that you can get the fulfillment.
You know what, today we're talking about sex, and when we talk about sex after 20 years of marriage, that's where we need to go. Because many couples right now, they have totally eliminated that out of their picture and out of their scope of their union. But sex after 20 years is still as fresh now as it was then. And I can only speak from experience. I can only tell you seriously how important that is. That brings you together. That two individual flesh coming together, that's bringing you together as one. So we as husbands, we need to make sure that we create the atmosphere within the home, to make sure that it's an atmosphere so that our wives will want to have sexual fellowship with us. You know, we talked about in past conversations about do benevolence, but when we're talking about sex and marriage and how important it is, we have to make sure that that's number one on our list. Not as just a physical touch, but we also have to look at it from a spiritual touch. We have to look at that we're pouring into our wives. So therefore, men, we need to make sure we need to make sure that we groom ourselves to the point where, hey, our wives are going to want us. We're going to make sure that we create that atmosphere just like we were when we were 20 years old when we first got married. We got to set that same mood, that same romance, so that our wives will just simply say, hey, you know what? That's my husband. He still looks good to me. I still want him. So therefore, hey, we're going to bring this into our union. So today, we're going to talk about it. So as we're talking about sex this week, we're talking about the very importance of sex within a marriage between a husband and a wife. So it is important, and even after 20 years of marriage, it's still vital within a union.
When we're talking about sex, we're talking about how honorable it is in the eyesight of the Lord.
Yeah, and where it talks about even in the scriptures that the bed is undefiled. So that's something that God has truly made sure that it's a critical piece within the union and that it should be continuous with consistency.
And you're right, with consistency. And that Bible even talks about defrauding one another and do benevolence in a marriage, because it's so important that your body is not your own when it talks about sex, and my body is not my own when it talks about sex, and it's a fulfillment that each of us owe to one another, and it also is disobedient if we don't do it.
Absolutely. So even in the time of having a fasting, taking your time away from the physical things of life and then going into the spiritual, those are times when a couple must even get consent from one another before moving into that level of their prayer life.
Well, honey, wouldn't you say after 25 years of marriage, God has truly blessed us to whereas we know how to satisfy one another's needs and, seeing what's important about one another when it pertains to sex. And I have a question to ask you.
Okay, that's fine.
Because many times we talk about sex, but in a union, in a marriage, it's just not about sex anymore. It's about making love to one another.
Yeah, and it's funny that you should say that, because when you talk about sex and making love, those are really two distinct things. Because having sex, you could just be having fun, you could just be in the flesh. Just physically, you're just trying to satisfy yourself. But whereas when you're making love, you are really engaged with your wife or your husband.
And I would say you're right about that, because that's what I look at when we're talking about us making love to one another. When we make love to one another, it's not about just doing what you do, but it's a spiritual connection that both of us as husband and wife need to really engage into when we're talking about making love to one another.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about becoming one flesh, that's a part of that. And when two are becoming one, that is a true happy experience. And I look at it really from a point of that's a benefit from God. It's a benefit from God. Even when he told Adam and Eve in the garden, he said, come together. He said, leave and cleave and then come together and become one. He said, go and be fruitful and multiply. That was a part of that sexual fellowship, as I like to say it. It's sexual fellowship.
Ladies, let's talk about it. Some of us try to put our husbands on punishment, but you know what? You're only hurting yourself, because you have a need as well as he have a need, and both of you should be trying to aim and please each other sexually so that both of you can be fulfilled.
Okay, fellas, let's get real about this, because is it all about you? Is it all about me as a husband when we get into that bedroom? I'm going to tell you right now, no, it's all about her. So therefore, whatever we're doing, we should be pleasing her in the bedroom. And therefore, if we're pleasing her, she's going to please us. So we have to remember to be real about this. We're the husband. We're the priest. We're the head. So therefore, let's lead in every area. Not just leading in communication, not just leading as a mentor to our wives, but we also have to lead in the bedroom. And that bedroom is a very important place. So let's take some notes on this particular session.
Honey, even when you talk about Adam and Eve, we have to remember that they were not ashamed of being naked.
No, they weren't.
I mean, they were disclosed and had no shame to their game. But now we look at sex. You can look at sex and people feel that it's dirty. It's something that's unclean. But when you look about, or even when you think about Adam and Eve, they were both naked. The scripture even talk about them being both naked and unashamed.
And you know what? And when you say that many couples or look at it as being something dirty, see, many times that can come from when they were in their singleness and not shedding off the singleness, and now you have a union with your husband and or wife. So now you should be coming together as one flesh. That's where the scriptures go and talks about that the bed is undefiled. So again, God absolutely loves that sexual fellowship within that union. So now as we're wrapping up this week and going into our next topics and what have you, we need to give a couple of action items for our couples. I think they'll be very excited this week about that. So when we're talking about sex in marriage, you need to sit down, talk with your spouse, and find exactly what makes them happy. When you're talking about sex and making love to them and bringing them closer to you. It doesn't always have to be from a physical sense, but it also can be from a touching and holding hands, conversation with one another. You can make love to one another just by having a conversation. So therefore, let's leave today and let's get ready to tell our audience goodbye, and we're going to forget about this week and we're going to move into our next week.